All right, let's get into it. Today, we are going on a journey, a real life treasure hunt for a text that was lost for over 1,500 years. And this isn't just any old text, it's a masterpiece that tries to tackle one of the oldest, heaviest questions we all face. Why do we suffer? So let's dive right in. The whole thing starts with a mystery, right? A long lost work from one of early Christianity's most brilliant and famous figures. I'm talking about a commentary so profound, its disappearance basically left a hole in history for centuries. And to really get just how big of a deal this was, you first have to meet the man himself. He was a 4th century priest from Antioch, and he had this nickname, Boca d'Oro, which means the golden-mouthed. And trust me, he earned it. John Chrysostom was an absolute titan of his time. We're talking about a guy whose sermons could move entire cities. He spent years living as a hermit in this really intense state of discipline before he became this major church figure. But, his style was, well, it was uncompromising, and that eventually got him exiled. He died on a forced march in 407 AD, and his last words were reportedly, "In all things, praise be to God." But one of his most important works, this incredibly deep dive into the biblical story of Job, it just, poof, vanished. And look, this wasn't just some forgotten text. This was Chrysostom's guide to life's most painful question. It was a full-on exploration of what faith looks like under extreme pressure. And for a millennia and a half, it was just gone. So how in the world does a 1,500-year-old manuscript just reappear? Well, it takes a whole lot of luck and the incredibly patient work of people you could basically call manuscript detectives. Okay, so check out this timeline. It just brilliantly illustrates the enormous historical gap we're talking about. For centuries, this thing was basically hiding in plain sight. Get this, way back in 1764, a librarian in Florence catalogs an ancient manuscript and he even publishes its opening lines. But nobody realized what it was. It took all the way until 1988 for a scholar, H. Sorlin, to finally piece together multiple manuscripts and publish the first complete, critical edition of the lost work. 1988. But the second it was published, the discovery kicked off this huge, fierce scholarly debate. I mean, was this really the work of the great Golden Mouth, or was it something else entirely? All right, so let's look at the evidence. You can almost picture this like a courtroom drama for a centuries-old manuscript, right? With scholars acting as the prosecution and the defense. So the core conflict, which you can see right here, was all about the style. The critics pointed out that the text felt raw, kind of fragmented and disordered, not at all like the polished, eloquent sermons Chrysostom was famous for. But the defenders? They argued that was its greatest strength. It reads like an unrevised first draft. Maybe something he dictated for a popular audience. It was like capturing his raw thoughts before they got all polished up. But ultimately, the internal evidence just became overwhelming. The specific version of the Bible text he used, the really literal way he interpreted it, the theological themes, the vocabulary, it all pointed directly to Chrysostom. So the verdict came in, this was the real deal. A genuine, maybe a little unpolished, but absolutely authentic lost masterpiece. So now that the case of the lost manuscript is officially closed, we can finally open its pages and explore the powerful ideas that were hidden away for so long. And it all centers on that biblical story of Job. Now, Chrysostom doesn't offer any easy, comforting answers. No. Instead, he gives us this profound and pretty challenging framework for understanding our deepest struggles. And it all starts with Job's own words. He kicks things off with Job's famous declaration of faith, right after he's lost everything, his wealth, his kids, his health. But then Chrysostom adds this really crucial theological lens to this moment of absolute devastation, and it revolves around one key Greek concept. And this concept right here, synkatabasis, is absolutely central. Now, it's often translated as divine condescension, but it really means something more like a loving accommodation. For Chrysostom, God isn't distant. He actually bends down to meet us where we are, even right in the middle of our suffering. It's his way of saying that hardship isn't a sign that God is absent, but actually a strange and difficult form of his presence. This idea just turns the whole story on its head. In Chrysostom's view, Job's trial is not a punishment. He calls it a spectacle, like a public demonstration. It was a test that God allowed, not to break Job, but to reveal a depth of faith and strength that could never have been shown in a life of ease and comfort. And to make this idea truly unforgettable, Chrysostom doesn't just explain it, he uses this incredibly powerful metaphor that feels just as modern today as it must have back in the 4th century. He asks us to completely reframe how we see Job. I mean, forget that image of a passive victim of fate. Instead, Chrysostom presents Job as a champion, a spiritual competitor who's been chosen for the greatest contest imaginable. And this just brilliantly illustrates his point. The struggle was not meaningless. No way. It was a championship bout with the highest stakes, all played out before a cosmic audience. And just look at who he was up against. This was not a fair fight. Job was facing this relentless onslaught designed to break him from every possible angle. You've got supernatural forces, profound personal loss, unbearable physical agony, and the psychological torment of being misunderstood by his closest friends and even his own wife. What Chrysostom shows us is that as Job's body was literally being destroyed, covered in sores, sitting on a dung heap, scraping his skin with a piece of pottery, his inner spirit, his spiritual resolve was actually being perfected. His physical destruction was the very stage for his spiritual renewal. So what this all means is that the suffering had a purpose. In this framework, the goal of the whole contest wasn't to crush the athlete. It was to prove his strength, to create a testament to the power of human faith under the most extreme pressure you can possibly imagine. And that leaves us with a final thought, a way to connect this ancient, rediscovered text to our own lives. If Chrysostom is right, if our trials really are a kind of cosmic stadium, then it forces us to ask ourselves, what strength is our own struggle meant to reveal?